in 2022. It's based loosely on a real event that took place in Peru, I understand, in 2020. What we have is a sort of a religious sect stroke community um, uh, outside a small town area. And within that community, the men who basically control it are treating their women, and through that the teenage girls and the children as chattels. And many of them, not all of them, but many of them are guilty of sexually abusing their women folk to the point of raping them at night after they've been sort of drugged to prepare them for the incidents. And then the feeling that the women experience of being violated, the men then try to convince them that it's something satanic or witchcrafty or a ghost or a figment of their female imagination. They also use the power of religion to try to silence the women and basically say that they shouldn't breathe or say anything about these weird experiences because it will lead to them not being accepted into the holy land of salvation. So there's a very strong theological pressure on the women to remain numb. We then meet early on in the film, there's an incident involving a young girl who's experiencing some sort of attack, and she shares with the women that she saw a man escaping from the room after the incident that's frightened her. And this then leads to a number of men being pinpointed as possibly responsible for physical and sexual abuse of the women, and they are taken to the local police station. But at the time we join it, the rest of the men have gone to that location to get them all out on sort of, well, it's not mentioned on bail, but basically have gone there to get them released based on the fact that this is just a figment of the woman's imagination. The women are then left alone with their children, and their various members of the female fraternity then pose the question, what should their response be to these series of sexual assaults, bearing in mind that they may well lose the opportunity to move to the kingdom of heaven, but they have three options: do nothing, fight what's going on, or leave. And the film spends the vast majority of time looking at the implications of these, and the emphasis is mainly put on leaving and what that will bring about for the community. The fact that they would be free of this abuse, but alongside that, of course, they would have to be away from males, both boys and men, and the implication of that, the possible giving up of this travel towards the kingdom of heaven is also mentioned. And the implication on the children being without adult figures if they are removed. So the women decide to have a series of meetings to consider the pros and cons of those three options, but with particular emphasis on leaving and how that is likely to change their life road. And there are many elements, perhaps, of the political aspect of female rights alongside workers' rights, and the fight that needs to take place, just like the fight that had taken place for workers to establish rights over their workplace, and then rights over the form of government through the vote. They have actually been given the right to vote by the elders, the menfolk, but we're not quite sure what exactly that is for. There still lingers at the back of the discussion the fact that some of them may well be talking nonsense, so it's not 100% clear that by everyone that leave is the only option. Some of them are quite willing to stay, and a few of them to fight, even though they've all been subject to some form of sexual abuse, and quite a large number of them are pregnant with the abuser's fetus. And so there's the implication as to what's going to happen when those children are born. There's also bits of laughter thrown in from time to time to lighten the mood, although it's generally quite a serious sort of way of looking at the morals, the dilemmas facing these group of women, and the performances by the individual women. And will be a slide with full cast members. It will give you some indication when you see it of what actresses actually adopt certain positions with regard to how to leave, and particular emphasis on protecting children is one thing. I also found it quite amusing that midway through we had some light music, and the director, Sarah Polley, decided to use Daydream Believer by the Monkees, which again is basically suggests the metaphor with regard to these stories that the women claim happen may well be encompassed within that title of that song, and I found that quite amusing. There's a man there who's been employed as a teacher, played by Ben Whishaw. The women generally lack any education, lack any skills, which have been deliberately deprived for them. But this man has come in to give a sort of rudimentary type of education to the women and the children. And he's, of course, drawn into this situation about fight or flight, which, of course, is the response that we have to a fear situation, which clearly the women are in. And we generally move towards a situation where leaving appears to be preferable, because of that feeling of safety that will be obtained by fleeing. I also found it very interesting that it sort of brought into the discussion the notion of male power, male dominance over women, and of course the history would concur with this. And other subjects that were thrown up was love, very emotive, but why people love. What is the need for love? Why do they give love? Why do they want love? And their perspective on this, that within this colony, this issue has often resulted in violence by the male perpetrators. And although detail isn't explored on this, of course, it could be interpreted that they don't recognise that women have a need for love, and they are unwilling to give love. They don't want love, they just want a physical release of sexual feelings. The third meeting also discusses the males as to whether they should be allowed to join the women as an option for leaving or not, and that lots of pros and cons are brought out really with regard to the risks of that involving giving an option to the men to leave if they wish. And I found that also quite intriguing. And we then, one woman questions the whole notion of the religious power going to heaven, so to speak. And she asked the question, what has God done to protect the women and the children in this colony, attacking this notion of the all-powerful Almighty as a good feeling. And this is a bit of a spanner in the works of many women's belief systems with regard to, if they tolerate this abuse, they'll end up in the right place when they die, in the kingdom of heaven. So it conjures up a lot of these thoughts, and I really found the more I watched it, the more gripping it became, because of the deepness in which they were looking at the issues, the violence, for example, and the notion of the few that wanted to fight was also discussed. And was it something to do with revenge or hatred, or is it just down to safety, or all these emotions were sort of cast into the ring, really, so that the women could then consider which of the three choices they choose to do. And there was some discussion also about what about the fate of the unboiled child, as many of the women, well, most of them have been raped. And so we also caught some members who quickly became anxious for very little, the stress with which they've been living under, and it's taken its toll with some of the elders who can't handle really the atmosphere, and so we then have to focus on other issues, such as the recklessness of their decision the urgency, the intensity of it, and the curiosity about what it would be like after this. And then, of course, there's the emotional control, and of course, touching on the volatile sexuality of the males. We then move towards the final frames, when the women see that the men are returning on the road, and this hastens their need to gather up their belongings. And there's a point that says that they appear to gather up their life possessions in just a couple of hours, and they're ready to go. And one woman points out that she'd rather risk dying in a buggy on the trail, trying to escape, rather than remain at the colony, which again gives sort of insight as to the desperation. There's also a brief sort of so-called romance that develops between Ben Whishaw's character and the girl Ona, but it's only generally scratched the surface, although it's clear that there is some love between the two of them. But of course, he, as the teacher, he will remain and isn't prepared to flee with the women, and so that brief glimpse of the emotional fondness isn't really developed by the director that much. And the final frame I found extremely... just before the end, as they leave, we see an array of faces, fashions, emotions. It reminded me quite a bit of Fellini when he cast his camera around an array of characters and focuses in close up to their facial expressions and their style of dress to capture a sort of character assessment of them, and I found that intriguing. The final frame, we see the newborn being arriving after a birth, and a narrative comment that life is going to be very different for you, which encapsulates the true benefit of leaving this environment.